This episode is powered by Act Now Education. Go to www.actnoweducation.com for free comprehensive educational resources and opportunities for active duty, veterans, military spouses, and children.
You know, when you asked about my transition, one thing I didn't mention is, I think one thing I started saying, or one thing I often hear is, I wish I would have heard about this sooner, right? So there's nothing worse than hearing about a resource that you could have taken advantage of at year 2, and you're not hearing about it until you're essentially leaving, right? So, you know, kind of, I would say maybe humble yourself, go to that course, ask the questions, and then engage with those instructors and people in that type of process.
Warriors, fall in. It's time for formation. Today, we're joined with one of Act Now Education board members, and he's also described as the encyclopedia of all military transitioning resources. He's a retired 20-year Navy veteran, and today he's going to talk to us about his own transition experiences, his role with Act Now Education, and give us some strategies and tips for a career transition, because at the end of the day, this gentleman is always posting great content onto Act Now Education's Facebook, as well as providing mentorship and advice for many folks within our military community. Today, I'm honored to have the man himself, Mr. Tyrone Hewitt. How you doing today, sir?
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you, and I appreciate you giving us your time. I know you're extremely busy being a family man, and you're extremely busy working full time, and then also devoting so much time and effort towards the nonprofit that we're all a part of. And so thank you for joining us here on the Morning Formation and allowing our listeners to hear some insight into what you know and what you do every single day, because I understand that you currently are working as the education administrator for Act Now Education as well. But I want to kick things off with this episode, and just like I've been asking a lot of my recent guests, I want to hear, what's your most memorable experience, Tyrone, when you were wearing the uniform?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I would say I think my most memorable experience while I was in the Navy would probably be my last deployment. I remember, so I deployed on a carrier with the fighter squadron, and I was in a hangar bay, and I remember thinking, oh, wow, this is probably the last time I'm going to deploy overseas. And for anybody who's ever deployed overseas, whether or not your boots on ground or, you're on a vessel, you're doing some pretty awesome stuff. So I just kind of thought to myself, I'm like, man, this is, probably my last time where I'm going to be part of something greater than myself. So both happy, but honestly, kind of sad at the same time.
Yeah, it is a little bit, it is a little strange. It's a weird place to be when you're deployed, I think. And a lot of folks out there listening who have been deployed can identify with what you're saying, because I feel the same way about my deployment to Iraq, which happened in 2004 and 2005, where it was an honor to definitely go over there and do something greater than yourself. But at the same time, you literally had to leave everything behind, sacrifice time with family, time with loved ones, time with just simply being here for all the holidays, all the birthdays, and everything that so many other folks get to enjoy. So I think your most memorable moment is something that many people are sort of conflicted on when it comes to talking about, and also trying to understand, was it a good time or was it a bad time?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it was just a memorable time. So very well said there, Tyrone. And I want to kick things off and talk about your own military career transition, because you helped so many folks in our military community transition and prepare. Would you mind describing what your own transition was like?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I often tell people is I got kind of lucky on the transition portion, because a lot of the things that we kind of told people to do or look towards, I was already doing, but for a while I wasn't aware that I was actually preparing to transition. One of the examples I would use is because of tuition assistance, I was a huge advocate of using free education, right? So I'm like, man, they're going to send me to school for free. So I went to school, got my bachelor's degree in sociology, spoke to some classmates, and like, man, you're probably going to want to get a master's degree. So I did that also. But I wasn't quite aware, and I'm not saying you have to have a degree to get a job or get a good job or whatever, but it definitely made my transition easier because I went into human services, and that's what my degree was in. And I also volunteered a lot, which gave me some, non-paid experience, helped my network. So those two things helped out. I was always frugal, kind of, aware of how I was going to spend my money. So that made the financial aspect easier. But after I went to TAP, and that next, I would say 15 months, and I got closer, particularly those 6, 7, 8 months out from actually retiring, I realized, holy smokes, there's a lot more to this. Did I get the right degree? Did I network enough? Did I network with the right people? Is my medical stuff adequately documented for my VA benefits, my VA claim? Did I financially prepare like I thought I should have? So as I got closer, what I often tell people is, I don't think it matters how much you think you prepared. It is extremely stressful, because you're asking yourself, am I making the right decision? I retired at 20 years, 8 days. I could have done 26 based on higher tenure in my pay grade. So I'm like, man, am I doing the right thing? Should I stay in? Because that's constant. I knew I was going to get a check every 2 months or every 2 weeks, right? So you're almost questioning yourself, right? So yeah, I took it pretty seriously, trying to network, asking a lot of questions, making sure that once I drove out the gate with that golden ticket, that I was as best prepared as possible.
Yeah, and you had a 20-year military career, and so did you actually mature and come to the point in your military career where you started valuing and started recognizing the importance of education? Did you get your bachelor's degree? Did you get that later on during your career?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I went from a sea duty command out in California, went to shore duty in Virginia Beach. And for those of you who aren't aware, the way that kind of works is you're either deployable or non-deployable. So deployable, 3 deployments, really wasn't focused on education. When I got to Virginia Beach, I'd been at my command for, maybe 2 weeks. And there was a guy, if I remember correctly, so this is like December 2003. He's like, so what are your plans? I'm like, maybe I'm going to go to college. And I think if it wasn't for him, I may have never gone. And the reason why I say that is because, hey, so this is December, classes are starting first week of January. And I'm like, I think I'm probably going to start classes in March or during the summer, spring or summer. He was like, absolutely not. He's like, you need to go to the Navy College office, talk to them, and sign up now and start in January. Because if you say you're going to start in March, you're going to start in June. If you're going to start in June, you're going to start in the fall. And you're going to do that for 3 years. And I think, I'm going to be honest with you, I think if he didn't have that conversation with me, I may have spent 3 years kind of putting it on a back burner. And once I started, I found it to be actually pretty cool. And I got lucky because, when you're going to school, and the way I went with there were a lot of senior enlisted individuals in my classes. So they were having conversations with me about really the importance of going to school for advancement purposes in the Navy, but also a lot of these people were on their way out the door. So I got a lot of mentoring for those, 3 or 4 years in school, and then some of the people I worked with. So I started, I guess maybe a little bit later in age, but as a career aspect, I was often one of the younger people in my classes.
Yeah, it's that probably felt kind of odd. And so in 2003, when you had that conversation, how many years have you been in, and how old were you at that time?
2003, I had been in, holy smokes, I guess coming up on, holy smokes, so 2003, so I'd been in over 5 years. So I was actually coming up on 6 years.
So you were right at that mark that most people enlist. They usually enlist for 4 years and then they get out. So
yeah,
there's a really good potential that you could have just done your first enlistment of 4 years and gotten out and walked away with no additional education but
Yeah.
luckily you re-enlisted and then you had that
Yeah.
conversation with someone that made you do it now. And I think that's
Yeah.
really important, man, because it's kind of like going to the gym, right?
Yeah.
People are
Hey,
like,
yeah.
oh, I'm going to start Saturday. I'm going to start next week. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, go now. Go
Yeah.
now.
So, that's a good point. So I remember when it came up for me to re-enlist, I asked myself, I was like, man, what do I want to do if I were to go back to Texas? And I didn't really have a plan. I was like, man,
Mhm.
I don't really know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to live. I mean, quite honestly, I had loved what I was doing at the time. I got off my third Westpac, or I was on my third Westpac when I reenlisted. So, for those who don't know, you deploy from typically a West Coast um, squadron or boat vessel, and you hit up places like Hong Kong, Singapore. I mean, I'd been all over Asia. Um, some pretty cool deployments, young, married, so I wasn't away from my family, and I really enjoyed it. So staying in, it wasn't like, oh, this sucks, I'm getting out. I was like, man, I could probably do this some more, right? So yeah, I could have gone out, really no plan, no degree. And then when I got to Oceania, that's when I believe, if I remember correctly, his name's Castro. He was like, man, you need to go to school. And he kind of explained it to me. He was currently a student, and I think it definitely worked out for the best.
Yeah, I had a similar situation when I was a platoon leader. Well, first of all, I went right into the Army. I was a second lieutenant. And then within 30 to 40 days, I found myself in Iraq and had my first platoon in Iraq. And that was stressful in itself because you don't want to cut your teeth like downrange. You ideally
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
spend
yeah,
some
yeah.
time in garrison, right? I didn't have that choice. And so with that being said, by the time I came back from my deployment, I was a first lieutenant and I was pretty well weathered and experienced, having dealt with all the things I dealt with downrange. The one thing that I emphasized the most when I was a platoon leader and an executive officer for my company as a first lieutenant was education, because at the time we were deploying a lot and I would try
Yeah,
to get the younger enlisted folks to understand the importance of, when you're here,
yeah,
focus your Fridays and Saturday nights at the education
yeah,
center, utilize your
yeah, yeah, yeah.
time. So the story that you mentioned, the conversation that you had in 2003 with the was it your platoon sergeant or your squadron
He
leader
was
or
a shift supervisor.
shift supervisor? I mean, it could be anybody in reality that you have a small
Yeah,
conversation with that kind of has that light bulb go off in your head and tells you to go
yeah,
now. I had that conversation with several of my own soldiers. So
yeah.
um, going back to what you mentioned, you said TAP earlier. For people out
Yep,
there who don't know what TAP is, would you mind just
yep.
briefly explaining what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So TAP is the Transition Assistance Program that's mandated by essentially DoD and Congress. And what it does is it puts the service member through a 3, 4, or 5 day process, depending on a number of different factors. Now it's based off 2 groups. And it's designed to help them prepare to separate from the military, whether or not they've been in for 4 years and they're in E4, or they've been in 30 years and maybe they're in O6. So that's what TAP essentially is in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that folks out there that are listening, I wanted to underline that because when I made my transition out, I was my own worst enemy. I didn't go through TAP.
Yeah,
I literally I was an officer, so I was an O3, so I could kind of skip the line on some of the things when I was out processing and getting things signed. And
yeah,
I had this thing in my head where I thought, well, I don't need them. Like, I'm good, right? I'm good.
yeah,
So I went over there like on the last day that I needed to get the signatures, and I just walked in. I was like,
yeah,
here, sign this. And they were like,
yeah,
well, wait a second. And I was like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't, like, I got a
yeah, yeah,
job.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
good to go. Utilize all your resources. All right.
yeah,
Listen, because you never know. There's
yeah,
someone in there that could probably help you out. And
yeah.
so, yeah, I wanted to make sure that people understood what TAP
Uh,
was.
that's a good point. So I don't traditionally teach the mandated TAP courses. I do help with them since COVID. They've kind of brought me on and said, hey, can you help teach some of these courses? Right. But I do I do a lot of capstone. So the capstone is that last kind of interview with the TAP counselor who ensures that you have really all the things you're supposed to have to get your DD 2648, which is that form that, it's not your DD 214, but it says, hey, this person's received all their career readiness standards. And I think you kind of hit it on the nail. So sometimes I can do a capstone on an E1 who is separating for whatever reason, and I can do a capstone on an O6 who's retiring back to back, E1, O6. And I think you kind of hit it on the head. I think sometimes, all too often, I find people who don't think they need it, right? And what I tell everybody is everybody has different needs based on a number of factors. At least go get all the resources, ask all the questions, because if you have 200,000 people who separate a year, those are 200,000 different scenarios, right? And if you go to TAP and you get just one thing that says, holy smokes, I didn't know about that, let me learn that, or let me ask more questions, then I think you've probably gained value, especially if you're networking within your course and you're asking some of the instructors vital questions. I think, part of the TAP process is, those TAP instructors, how much information you're sharing, because TAP is it's very basic. But if you have a TAP instructor who's kind of going in the weeds and putting out information, I think the light bulb comes on. And that's why I've kind of approached my LinkedIn posts the way I do, because there's a fire hose of information. Some of it you may have not heard. Some of it you may have not realized that applies, whether or not it's in a TAP book or a VA benefits book. And I like to kind of break TAP down. But like this morning, I talked about the VA on-the-job training program, which a lot of people aren't aware of. But that's spoken about in the VA benefits course, right? But they may have missed it, but they may need it or want it. So I'm like, hey, go read those books, highlight, dog your pages, contact us and say, hey, can you kind of reiterate? Because, when you asked about my transition, one thing I didn't mention is, I think one thing I started saying, or one thing I often hear is, I wish I would have heard about this sooner, right? So there's nothing worse than hearing about a resource that you could have taken advantage of at year 2, and you're not hearing about it until you're essentially leaving, right? Because now you're maybe behind a curve on getting a degree or using Cool or Onward to Opportunity, or SkillBridge is a big one, right? So, kind of, I would say maybe humble yourself, go to that course, ask the questions, and then engage with those instructors and people in that TAP process.
Yeah, definitely. I had a plan, but my plan wasn't bulletproof. And that was the problem. I didn't run my plan by anyone else. And I think if I had sat in front of someone like yourself, who has literally seen hundreds of other people transition, you would have brought up things that I didn't think about. And that's the one thing I wish I would have done better for my own transition. So
that's good. I made a post about that a couple months ago, and the way I open up my LinkedIn post is, do you have somebody punching holes in your transition plan, right? And then underneath that, I gave, I don't know, a couple dozen different, what about this? And, the idea is, it isn't to, piss anybody off or offend anybody. Right. When I'm doing it, and I tell people like, hey, I'm not going to try to, piss you off, but I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions about what you just told me.
Oh, yeah.
And it gets you thinking, you're like, holy smokes. Like a lot of people will say, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to use my GI Bill for housing. That's great. But what happens if the program doesn't start for 2 months after you get out? What are you going to do about housing allowance then? Because you're not going to get it, right? What are you going to do if the SkillBridge is 90 days, but you only approved for 60 days? And all these other scenarios, right? And you as a leader, this in the Army, and what you do now is you always want to have different courses of action, right? If this didn't work out, what's my backup plan? Because it happens. I think somebody on Act Now, I think it was maybe Nicole or Mickey, put down what's some of the best transition advice you've been given. And one of the things we often talk about is saving money and having a budget, because you get out one May, but what happens if you don't have a job and you don't have a retirement check until July? Did you budget? Because you can get hired on, but a company may say, oh, we're going to hire you, but we're not starting you for another 45 days, right? So and there's so many scenarios where if you're not talking to a person who has either lived it, experienced it, or they're the expert in that area, they can ask you a number of questions where you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. because it sounds good, but is somebody vetting your process? So that's real good.
Yeah, no, that's really, really wise to do that. And that's a great segue into my next question because I want to talk to you, man. You post a lot of really thought-provoking content on the Act Now Education Facebook group, as well as your LinkedIn. I mean, things that I read and I'm like, wow, like that's incredible. Or you're opening some eyes to some new type of opportunity that's out there. Tyrone, how long have you been a member of Act Now Education?
So I think it's been a little over 2 years now, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, so Act Now Education has been around for a few years. It started out with just Jay, and then Jay
Yep.
was posting and posting and posting, and then all of a sudden we had like extra folks that wanted to be involved with it, like yourself,
Yeah.
who Jay picked up as well, and some really great. We have some really great board members that are.
Yeah.
I think the best thing about our board members is their overall passion. I mean, these are folks
Yeah.
that are holding down full-time jobs, family people that still manage, just like yourself, that still manage to find
Yeah.
time to
Yeah.
reach back and help out our military community. And would you mind talking to us about your role as an education administrator with Act Now?
Yeah. So before I do that, let me say a couple of things. So one, yeah, the team is amazing. Like when I talk to members in the team or I see what they're saying or doing, like yeah, I think you just had Yasmin a couple weeks ago, and when she talks about some of the stuff we do
Mhm.
and she's giving ideas, I'm like, holy smokes, like that's really good. And then like
Yeah.
Nicole, man, Nicole's an Army veteran. She's always, talking about transition and career readiness and stuff like that. She's another person where I kind of sit back and I'm like, man, she's like, she's brilliant. And kind of going to Jay. So Jay reached out to me. I think it was 2 years ago. It's so interesting. COVID is kind of thrown all these years into one. So I
Right.
get like 2020 and 2021 really confused.
Mm.
And he and I spoke, and we were talking about Act Now Education. And I'd been following Act Now Education for a while. And some of the interviews he was doing and some of the videos, and I was like, man, this guy's really good. I was like, some of the stuff he was sharing and some of the stuff he was doing, I was like, man, I was like, let me stalk this dude. And then he contacts me. He's like, hey, do you kind of want to, join a team? And I remember talking to him for about 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. And he's telling me some of the stuff he had envisioned. And then I started getting kind of scared. I was like, man, this guy is like, I'm like
Motivated, yeah.
surface level. And he was like, wait, he's like, I'm thinking about this, we're doing this, and I have this going on. I was like, holy crap, I just like to share information. And I was like, yeah, man, I'm down. And then when I got off the phone with them, I remember sitting down thinking, man, I don't know if I can contribute anything, because I started going into, what they call imposter syndrome. And I was like, I don't think I'm what he thinks I am. I was like, but we've been hanging tough for years now. And even still when I talk to him sometimes, I'm like, like when we have meetings, I don't know if he sleeps. And this,
Oh,
sometimes
I
when we
know.
have our meetings or stuff that's going on, it's 8 or 9 o'clock here, it's 3 o'clock where he's at. And I'm like, when does this
Hmm.
guy sleep? Because he has a full-time job,
Yeah.
right? He's not, investing in something and, has all his free time. He has a full-time job and a family.
Right.
But anyway, they did Act Now. So what I do with Act Now, right? So about 15 months ago, 16 months ago, Jay reached out to us. He's like, hey, we got this deal with Coursera, right? We're going to be one of the, I guess, administrators with that. So he spoke with John and I, and kind of walked us through that process of what we would be doing. So what I currently do now, and I was doing it, throughout this morning, is so we have National Guard, reservists, active duty service members, who are a year out, active duty service members who are 2 years from retirement, veteran spouses, military spouses. We have, I think it's almost 10,000 courses now, and some certificates that they can participate in for free, right? So and when that service member or that applicant applies, I'll go through their applicants and approve them. If I don't approve them, maybe I'll contact them and say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. But I also kind of do there's some behind the scenes stuff where sometimes, like a lot of people will ask, what should I do in Coursera? Because there's a lot of stuff to do. So I may say, what do you want to do? What's your career goals? And then I'll either, we're either messaging back and forth or emailing, and I'll say, hey, you want to go in HR? Here's all these HR courses that I think would be really interesting. Or, you want to, gain interest in Excel. Here are all these courses, So even I took courses last year. I do transition for the mainly Navy, but a lot of the other branches I assist with. So I took, 6 or 7 different career courses, resume writing and LinkedIn courses. But what I do is, essentially help people with that application process. And then if they reach out to me, kind of help them figure out, what may be a way forward. Because once you log in and you see what's available, it can be overwhelming. Because there's, like I said, 97 or 9,800 courses right now. And it's like, holy smokes, what do I want to do? Right. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I logged in as well and saw all the courses that were available, and it's astronomical. Like the amount of different varieties and diverse courses that are out there, and it's all free, like to our community. It's absolutely amazing. And going back to what you talked about earlier about the entire board and the ACNO education team, there's definitely no shortage of passion and motivation and understanding when it comes to the experience of what it's like to transition out. And a lot of folks, when it comes to these type of nonprofits that are out there, a lot of folks are a little skeptical. They're like, well, what's the catch here? There is no catch. There's no catch at all, right? I mean, it's just us trying to, be the family that we are, our military family. We've kind of built a family within a family because it's ACNO Education family. I mean, you and I, Nicole, Mickey, all of us, even when we have our meetings and whatnot, it's enjoyable and it's fun. And we talk about business, but then we also, have fun as well. And so I am very honored to be a part of the ACNO Education team and have folks like you part of that as well. And going back to the Coursera courses that are being offered, would you mind describing some of the impactful things that ACNO Education has been involved with, like maybe the number of folks that have taken advantage of the Coursera courses and how many people have actually completed certifications through them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will, so I had to take a snapshot. I was like, man, let me look at those numbers because I track those numbers, right? Just because, it's one, I actually like numbers. I like analyzing things, even though that's not what I do with a job. So to date, right, this is just a couple minutes ago. So almost 53,000 learning hours. That's what those individuals who log in every night, every other night have participated in. So, 53,000 hours is a lot, right? So these are people logging in on their own time before their family wakes up, afterwards, whatever, taking a wide variety of courses, almost 12,000 different enrollments. So the enrollments could be multiple enrollments in the same course or different course. So you're talking almost 12,000, somebody going in and saying, hey, I'm going to enroll in this and complete it. And then to date, a little over 82,000 lessons taken, right? Wow. So, I think, so we're June 11th. So I think summer starts June 21st or June 31st. I got to look at my calendar again. But I am going to try to announce almost like a summer slam. My goal is to get maybe to hopefully, hey, let me look. I was going to announce it on there, but I'll just kind of talk about it now. I think I'm going to try to get by the end of the summer, over the summer, 100,000 lessons taken, maybe 75,000 learning hours, and 25,000 enrollments. 25,000 enrollments may be tough, right? Because if everybody's taking vacation, they may be going down. Right. But as we get more courses and we're piquing interest, we're going to hey, let's hope these people accomplish their goals. And every once in a while, we'll have people post their certificates and we'll put it on their page. We'll approve it and say, man, because, for anybody who's taken a certificate or gone to school, that can be tough if you're working and you have a family, or even if you're a stay-at-home parent, because that's a lot of stuff going on. So to take that time on your own when it's a lot easier to watch, Dwight on The Office and
Right.
laugh your night away, right? If these people are committing time, right? So we like to highlight a lot of the accomplishments to help people know, hey, we recognize you, and we applaud you, and to help motivate other people. Because I've had people message me, they're like, hey, I'm not sure I can do all this. I'm like, hey, just do one course at a time, 1 hour a day,
Right.
right? Sometimes I'll wake up back then I was waking up before my family and doing it, or, I'm in the office doing this. My wife's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm doing some more courses, but
Yeah.
yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of stuff.
And there's a mobile app as well for Coursera as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, what better time to knock out some certifications and some courses than when you're sitting out on a balcony somewhere on vacation
Yeah.
and just during some downtime? I mean, you'd probably be reading a book and relaxing anyways. So
Yeah.
stimulate
So, you know what?
yourself.
Let me touch upon that. It's kind of funny you say that. So, many years ago, I heard a guy speak. His name is Barry Black. He's the chaplain senate,
Mhm.
right? And he was taught. He had a sermon. It was a church. He had a sermon called "Why Not the Best," right? And this is kind of what I took into my transition, because I heard it right about the time I was actually on shore duty, right, going to college. And he was telling a story about how President Carter was a midshipman. He was interviewing to go into the nuclear propulsion program in the Navy, and he had an interview with um, Admiral Rickover, who ran. He's like the godfather of nuclear propulsion for the Navy, right? And if I remember the story correctly, the admiral asks President then, Midshipman Carter, where are you at in your graduating class? Admiral Carter tells him, I think he's like maybe 89 out of 600. I think those numbers are right. And he's pretty proud. But Admiral Rickover is like,
Mm.
what is that? And he's like, did you give your best? And President Carter, the way the story goes, is he thinks about it and he's like, you know what, maybe I haven't. And that kind of goes to the mobile app, right? So right now I'm big on um, audiobooks going to and from work, because that's like 30 minutes each way where I'm really doing nothing. So I'm
Right.
listening right now, I'm listening to Grant by Chernow. But even when I heard this sermon as I was going to college and in the Navy, you have to study for advancement exams. So when I thought about, Admiral Carter or President Carter, the way he kind of explained it is, when you think about all your free time, you're waiting in line to buy your groceries, you're waiting in line to go to medical, or all these other things, all these pockets of 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. What are you doing? Are you studying for anything? And Admiral Carter, or President Carter was like, man, I could have used my time a lot more wisely, which kind of goes to what you're saying. If you have that app and you are, sitting somewhere, sitting somewhere, maybe doing nothing or not much, hop on and knock out one quick lesson. So that's kind of cool that you brought up. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but
No, it
that kind of
totally.
made me think. That kind of makes sense when there's so much sit around and wait,
Right.
for your oil to get changed, right?
Right.
Sit around and wait for us to call you to get your teeth cleaned, right?
Right.
Sit around and wait to have your groceries delivered to your car when you're in
Right.
the parking lot at wherever you go,
Right.
right? And that adds up a
Oh,
lot in a week.
totally, totally. I can't tell you. There's been times where I've binged watched stuff on Netflix, or I binged myself on TikTok, and only
Yeah,
like maybe an hour into it or so, I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing? Like, I'm completely
yeah,
wasting my time right now. Time is just melting away. I could have
yeah,
done something more productive than I'd have something to show for my time than
yeah,
just watching someone else's content. Like, why not make my own content, or why not do a
yeah,
certification, or why not, like, what am I doing? So you got to ask yourself that question sometimes. And
yeah,
Coursera makes it so easy because
yeah,
there's the mobile app. It's, for our military community, if you meet those parameters that Tyrone mentioned
yeah,
earlier, then why
yeah,
not sign up? Why not go into
yeah,
Act Now Education, sign up on the Facebook group, and then take advantage of the Coursera courses that are being offered free to
yeah,
our military members out there. And, over 80,000 lessons completed. That's that's a huge crater. It's a huge impact in the folks out there for our military community who are taking advantage of it, but we need more. We need more people to take advantage of this opportunity because
Yeah.
it's available and it's free, and it's only going to enhance your overall career.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good. Definitely with the enhancement, right? Because you're always learning something new. And some people will say, well, how is this going to help me? Well, what did you learn? And even if you put on your resume, it's kind of like,
right.
because I often tell people, one of the questions I would probably ask in an interview is, hey, I noticed you took this Coursera class, like, in this subject, what did you learn? Right.
Yep.
And then you could effectively speak about how much more knowledge you've gained in that area. Right. So, I know there's some bigwig names for certs that
Yeah.
people were chasing, but are you learning the content for yourself, for your profession, and maybe going into another area?
Tyrone, that's actually fascinating that you mentioned that, because I was in several interviews where that happened to me. Gone are the days where you can just have the degree, the graduating diploma of your bachelor's degree or your master's degree, because that same day that you sit down with those recruiters, there's going to be 5 to 6 other people that also have degrees as well. So that's
Yeah.
not impressive enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the specific ones I was talking about, I sat down in several interviews where they actually asked for my transcripts.
Yeah.
And before the interview, they looked
Yeah.
through my transcripts and they took note of what classes I took. And then
Absolutely.
during the interview, they were asking me, they're like, "Hey, it looks like
Yeah.
while you were getting this degree here, it looks like you took these classes. Can you explain to us what you learned
Yeah.
in those classes and how you would apply those to this specific position?" And I was like, "Whoa!" I had to go back, and
Yes.
because they're not just looking at the
Yeah.
cereal box anymore, they're actually turning it on the
Yes.
side, looking at the ingredients, saying, "What's in
Yeah.
here?" You know?
Yeah.
And so that's where
That's
and that's really where certifications come into play. I
yeah.
just got um, a certification through DOL Coach for project management, and
Cool.
I did that because I wanted to be able to quantify the level of experience that I have in project management, and that's what their certification does. I can definitively say that I have done project management at a certain level, whereas my MBA is in project management and it's very general. So yeah, I completely know what you're saying with that.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, man. And so for the folks out there, within our community, the veterans, the military spouses, and the service members, what would you say would be the top 3 modern day strategies for our community with career transitioning?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one area that people often lack and maybe don't quite understand or underestimate is, I would say, the networking portion, right? So networking may be a lot easier for some people than others because, that could be the difference maybe between being an introvert and an extrovert, right? So if you're an extrovert, you don't mind having conversations with people, right? You could talk about anything. You could start the conversation, right? And what I often tell people is, in many cases, it is who you know, right, on getting to where you want to go, right. And once you start networking, you're building these genuine relationships. People get to know who you are, speak about who you are, but you also get a really good idea of, if you're networking with somebody in the company, what that company's about, what roles are available, et cetera, right. And I tell everybody, if you're transitioning, I would have a conversation quite literally with everybody, right? I remember I was in front of my house, and there was a person who came by and they dropped off an Amazon Prime box. And I asked them 3 or 4 questions because I was very curious about what they did, how many hours of work how many hours a week they worked, all these things, because I was kind of intrigued by that job, right?
Mhm.
And a person may say, well, that's not for me. But I think sometimes people miss out on career opportunities because they don't know, or they don't understand it, right? So,
Yeah.
when I'm talking to transitioners particularly, and they say, well, how can I start my networking? Well, in many cases, I would start my conversation off with what's going on, right? So if you and I were speaking and we go to the same church, or our kids are part of the same volleyball team, I would say, KP, long time no see. What you got going on, right? And I tell everybody, oh man, I don't have much going on. I'm retiring, I'm getting out of the Army in about a year. So I'm really looking at some career opportunities, not quite sure what I want to do. Hey, John, if I remember correctly, you said you're a financial analyst with this company. I'm not really sure what that's about. Would you, can you kind of explain it to me? And what I find is people are really interested in talking about what they do and talking about their companies, particularly if they love what they do and they love where they're at, right? And you can it's like recon. You're gaining information about these areas that you may not even be, because there's so many jobs in the civilian world. It's crazy. Like when you go to a job fair in all these companies, you learn about all these roles,
Right.
and you're learning about it. You may say, man, you know what? I like numbers. I like figures. Maybe being a financial analyst or as an analyst, something that I would be good at and like to do. Next question is, well, how do you become an analyst? Do I need a certificate? Do I need a degree? Do I need experience? And as you're networking, I mean, you can network with anybody, your family, your friends, your neighbor, people at church. If you have kids, they're often part of daycare schools and, sporting teams. If you're in the line and somebody in front of you works for Verizon and they have Verizon on their shirt, ask them, hey, I noticed you work at Verizon. What do you do? Because you want to gain as much intel as possible, right? I think the number says 40% of veterans leave their job within the first 6 months. I think that's the number.
It's
right?
more than that.
That's a lot. That's almost half, right? And that could be for a number of reasons, right? Maybe they're going for a better location, better pay. But I think one of the biggest things is job satisfaction, right? Job satisfaction and work-life balance, right? So as you're getting a lot of information when you're networking and you're doing these informational interviews, you can make a better decision on what you want to do. And once you start applying for those jobs, especially like I said, when you've built relationships with people, somebody would say, man, I know KP, I've known him for quite some time. Great attitude, really level-headed. I think he's somebody that would be a great team member. The networking doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the job, but it could definitely mean you're going to get an introduction to the rest of the team during an interview, right? They may say, man, why don't you bring in KP next week, see what time is available for him. We'd all like to talk to him, versus being that applicant out of one to, like if you look at a job for the applicants, Indeed tracks them, LinkedIn, you could have 300, 400, 500 applicants. So if you're applying for a job without being networked, are you even going to get looked at? But when someone says such and such company, bring so and so in, we know him, he's networked, he's well versed with the company. Let's at least have a conversation with the person. So I would say networking, right? Not using LinkedIn. So I made a post, I think yesterday on Act Now, maybe 2 days ago on Act Now Education. And the question was, I know a lot of veterans who don't put that they are a veteran. They don't put it in their title. They don't even highlight that they have that background. I was in the Army for 5 years or 10 years, and I honestly find it kind of strange. So the question was, why don't people highlight that? I would say creating a LinkedIn account and then really strategizing the networking portion, going back to what I said earlier, right? Connecting with people, messaging them, saying, hey, KP, I noticed you're a project manager for this company. Very much interested in, I was wondering if you'd have time to speak. Because I do find that a lot of people are always willing to kind of talk about what they do, right? And then there's so much information that's flowing through the people you're networking with or the people you're following with, because you're gaining that knowledge about information and resources, about all these opportunities, whether or not it's, Act Now Education or veterans, Vets to Industry, or any of these organizations, like Bruce. And I mean, there's so many people out there that share so much great information, right? Because I'll talk to people and I say, hey, do you have a LinkedIn account? They'll say, no, they think it's like Facebook. And I'm like, no. I'm like, if you're using it well, you're connected with the right people. Right. It's always like Kevin Bacon, right? The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I had a guy in my class a couple months ago for, I think it was job search strategies. And then on the board, I have a whiteboard I like to use where I kind of talk about soft networks and strong networks and soft networks. And I was telling him exactly what I would do and what I should have done because I didn't network the best of my capability when I was transitioning out. And I was like, I was telling him that the church I go to was big in community service, and I would have branched my networks through those people who ran that organization. And one of the guys in my class was like, well, what church do you go to? And I was like, oh, I go to this church. And he was like, well, do you know so-and-so? And I was like, yeah, I know him pretty well. And that student was like, oh, that's my brother-in-law. And I was like, you got to be joking me. So, and I was telling him that's exactly what kind of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon's like, because everybody seems to know somebody. Even if that service member, retiring individual did not come to my class, if his brother-in-law had ever come to me and say, hey, my brother-in-law is looking for some information about SkillBridge or resumes, can you talk to him? So we would have linked up there, but it was just so strange. And it happens a lot. I walk people through LinkedIn and all these resources, and they don't realize sometimes how small your network becomes, or I guess how big your network becomes once you start using it, right? So networking, right. LinkedIn. And then I would say the last one is really, and that's tough because I would say, so this is what I noticed, and every base does things a little bit differently, and you kind of tapped into it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people go to the 3-day class or maybe the 5-day class, depending on if they're doing a track, and then they would leave it at that. I would go to your branch office, right, on base, and get with the transition office and ask them, what other resources are there available, either on that base or outside the gate? Because the bases have a lot of other job search strategies, resume writing. They may have SkillBridge classes. They have a whole bunch of other resources that's going to help give you a whole bunch of knowledge, right? Or who they're networking with outside that gate. Because I often find that people are either uninformed or misinformed about certain resources, right? And kind of like I said earlier, some people will say, I wish I would have known about this sooner, but they would have heard about it sooner had they maybe asked more questions in TAP or gone to the TAP office and said, hey, can I learn more about SkillBridge? Can I learn about Marine Cool or Navy Cool or Army Cool, right? And then one of those educators may be able to say, yeah, absolutely, let's sit down and take 30 minutes, let me walk you through this, right? But I find a lot of people would I think there's missed opportunities when you don't know about these resources. I'm big on kind of VA education post 9/11. What I posted this morning is about the on-the-job training, right, / apprentice. So I get a lot of service members, and I get it, they don't plan on using their GI Bill because they don't want to go to college. I can respect that. But when they come through my office, I will walk them through the comparison tool and say, where are you going and what do you want to do? Here's some OJ opportunity. I just walked a Marine through it 3 days ago. I mean, I walk people through weekly, right? Because, you can go through an OJT that's approved by your state approving agency in the VA and get paid by that employer and still get your housing, right, for so many months. And it decreases over time, but it's more than worth it. Or if there's a company that's not approved, the state approving agency can actually get them approved. So a person may think, I don't want to use my GI Bill, right? And my concern is they're going to miss out on those resources, but they're trying to get into an area. I'm like, what better than getting trained for a job, right? And then networking within that job, and then getting paid by the job, and then getting paid by the VA. And then you may set yourself up to stay with that company as a full-time employee, right? And that's just one of the things that a lot of people don't hear about. But I would say, try to network with people and find mentors and follow Act Now Education and all these groups that's gonna let you know about opportunities that you've never heard about, because you're probably not talking about that on a smoke pit or the chow hall. Exactly. You're talking about how bad life sucks and you can't wait to leave.
So basically, number 1 was network. Number 2 was get yourself a LinkedIn profile. And number 3 essentially was sign up for Act Now Education, because
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
so many opportunities out there that you don't know about, and you don't
yeah,
have to touch your VA education. And that's
yeah,
what Tyrone is talking about, folks, that
yeah,
at the end of the day, there are so many things out there available to you that are
yeah,
not being marketed properly and are not talked about, in the
yeah,
chow hall and in the barracks and
yeah,
everywhere else. So
yeah,
this is the place where you can go and you can connect with folks who, even if you have questions, you join the Facebook group,
yeah. It's
throw a question out there.
and that's a good point. So it doesn't matter what you do. You're not going to see every resource out there. There are people, they'll post, hey, I want to share this certification plan or whatever, right? And either myself or Jay or somebody will approve it. And when I read it, I'm
Right.
like, holy smokes, I haven't heard about that. Let me share that, right? So I think we're probably going to get up to 30,000 members, hopefully today, on Act Now Education. But there are a lot of people, they may not necessarily be part of the team, but there are people who are part of Act Now Education that are sharing some really cool stuff. And it's like, oh, yeah, we got to get this shared. Or, like you said, sometimes people will say, can I get some additional information about real estate, being a real estate agent or whatever it is, and we'll just share it. And a lot of people, they'll copy and paste and say, hey, look at this or look at this. And it's just a big network of people who truly want to be able to share information that people get really excited when they can share
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
right? And there's so much support for those people in those groups where somebody may say, hey, I don't think I can do this. And somebody may chime in and say, hey, I went through that same course, pace yourself. I did it. DM me if you have questions. But yeah, absolutely. Join Act Now Education. Like I said, when I was seeing what Jay was doing a couple years ago, I was like, holy crap. I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
And it's just compounded by the people who either join a group or just part of the page.
It's totally great to be around like-minded folks, and
Yeah,
sometimes it's not cool to talk about education. It's not cool to nerd out on the future and where I'm going to go, right? But at the end of the day, some of us secretly nerd out on it, but we pretend
yeah,
we're cool when we're out around our friends. It's nice to find other people that find that stuff interesting, to think about tomorrow and what am I going to be doing for the rest of my life. And
yeah,
that's what the Act Now Education family is all about. And so everything that you talked about, everything that Tyrone talked about right now, as far as, I think he talked earlier about new positions, discovering that there's other positions out there that you didn't know anything about. And I got a real quick
yeah,
example that I was talking to someone the other day about my DOL coach um, certification that I received, and they were like, "What's project management? Like, what is that?" And I'm like,
yeah,
how do you not know what project management is?" And this specific person I was talking to was working as a paralegal, and I was explaining project management and how it could apply to her specific career, and she's like, "Well, I didn't
yeah,
even know that." So I could get this
yeah,
certification and I can do something that is a little more challenging. It might pay me a little more money. And I'm like, yeah, like you don't think like this. It's more like this. Like there's a lot of things out there that you can do, new positions and things
yeah,
like that. And you only learn when you surround yourself with folks like the family from Act Now Education. You talk to folks like Tyrone, that you find that out. And I'd say one of the things, Tyrone, before we wrap it up here, if you're a 4-year enlisted member of the military, you need to get on it. All right. You need to get on it.
yeah,
Don't walk away with just your advanced training or your basic training
yeah,
or your boot camp in hand. Walk away within those 4 years with certifications, with your college degree, if possible, college credits done. It's never too late. Even I'm talking to you veterans out there as well. So we're always transitioning, and I always say the best time
yeah,
to find a job is when you have a job. So
yeah,
constantly invest in yourself, joining Act Now
yeah,
Education, getting those
yeah,
certifications. And for the leaders out there, if you're not talking to your folks about these nonprofit organizations like Act Now, then you're wrong, because
yeah,
we need to align ourselves in a direction of success. And
yeah,
that's exactly why I'm focused on getting board members such as Tyrone here on the mic, because Tyrone is literally an encyclopedia of career transitioning resources. And Tyrone, I really appreciate you giving me your time today. Before we round everything out and finish off the episode, I want to give you an opportunity. Do you have a message, or do you have any advice for folks out there within our military community who have not tapped into the resources of Act Now Education?
Yeah. So yeah, you know what? I'm actually going to add to what you said. So yeah,
Mhm.
if you're 3 or 4 years in, definitely tap in, right? So here's the thing: if you're in 3 or 4 years, you may do 30 or 40. You don't know,
Right.
yeah, because things change. But what I like what you said is you are always in transition. We get a lot of veterans who go through Coursera and they are going into their third and even fourth kind of career or side hustle. Like there's a lot of people, in bookkeeping or these other things. So I'm talking people in their 50s and 60s, because we'll either converse or look at their LinkedIn profile, and I'm like, man, this person got on in the 80s and they did this, and then they did this, and now they're going into IT, or they're going into bookkeeping, or they're going into program management. So the fact that you said you're always transitioning is spot on, because I always ask myself, man, when am I going to maybe transition into something else? And what is that going to look like? Will I always do career advice or academic advising, or am I going to go into something else? So, as you become a part of us, you join our group and you're seeing all these things that are available, that gives you an opportunity to kind of say, man, I'm really interested in that. Let me learn about it. Let me take a course or ask some questions. That way, I can make sure I'm making the right move, and I'm much more better prepared. So yeah, absolutely. Always in transition.
Yeah. And a lot of things you said today, I think a lot of people are going to resonate with when it comes to either something they've experienced or something they're currently going through right now. And Tyrone, for anyone out there that's interested in reaching out to you and contacting you for questions, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Facebook through our Act Now page, Tyrone Hewitt, or LinkedIn. Once again, Tyrone Hewitt. I think my header says encyclopedia of transition resources. I have an Act Now education banner. You can follow me, connect with me, send me a message and say, hey, I have a question. My goal is either give you my goal is not always to give you the answer. I'll give you the answer if I can. But what I find about anything is sometimes people just tell you some information, but I'm gonna try to give you a resource, say, hey, this is where it says this, right? Or I'm gonna connect you to somebody who does. I'm like, I don't know, get with this person and they can answer your question. But yeah, definitely don't be a stranger. I'll do what I can to help you out or connect you with somebody who can definitely help out.
Let me tell you this much, folks. If you're interested in connecting with Tyrone, you can scroll down to the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, scroll down to the bottom. You're going to see all the links for Tyrone, how to contact him, his email, his LinkedIn profile, as well as the Act Now Education main website. And I'll also put the Facebook group link on there as well, so you can join the group. It's only a couple questions to go through. And then we basically vet people to join the group. And it's a very high quality group as well. So we make sure everything is very professional as well. Folks like Tyrone go through and they screen the questions and make sure all the posts are on point and purposeful. And I got to say this much, man. Tyrone, you're a heavy hitter in the military community as far as career transition. When I used to host the clubhouse room on Friday nights, when you weren't there, people were literally looking for your phone number to text you to get you on there because there was someone that desperately needed your assistance. And I think a few times they used to sing that song, Tyrone, you better call Tyrone.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I appreciated your support during the clubhouse days, and I currently love the fact that you're part of the Act Now Education team, and it's an absolute honor to serve next to you on the board for this great nonprofit. So thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Yeah, thanks, bro. Thanks for having me.
And folks, that's it for the morning formation. I want to thank you for tuning in and meeting Tyrone and getting to learn some of his insights on career transitioning. And as I always say, I want you to stay tuned, stay focused, and stay motivated. Warriors, fall out. You've been listening to the Morning Formation Podcast. I hope you found today's materials helpful and of value to your current situation. You can connect with me on Instagram at _morning_formation
_podcast, or you can connect with me via email at theformationpodcaster@gmail.com. Also, I would like to thank my partners at Act Now Education for their support. Authenticity, community, and trusted is what you can expect from all members of the Act Now Education team. You can link up with them today and learn about some new, free educational resources on their Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or at their website, actnoweducation.com. Whether today's show took you back to a nostalgic time or helped you think about tomorrow, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you again. Stay safe and stay motivated. Warriors, fall out.